What's something very rare that people think is very common?
Someone who has threatened to sue you follows through and files a lawsuit against you.
Along with this, people who say, "my lawyer," especially those Karen types in videos, do not have a lawyer. They just think that's the thing you say, lol.
An entry-level candidate who already has 3 to 10 years of experience in all relevant fields.
Being tone deaf. I'm a music teacher, and in my whole life I've come across less than 10 individuals who truly cannot match pitch or tell the difference between what they're trying to sing and what is in fact coming out of their mouths. These people are usually completely unaware and think they're singing just fine, and yet I constantly hear, "I'm so tone deaf, I can't sing at all," from people with completely normal ability. I blame all the Idol and talent shows for making average people think if they're not Beyoncé they should never sing and are awful. Most of us can hold a simple tune and enjoy doing so.
Making it big on YouTube, Twitch.
Yeah, that one guy you watch who only has 100 to 200 viewers on Twitch is actually in the top 1% or something. LMAO, it's crazy.
Intentionally tainted Halloween candy. Remember growing up, some kids couldn't trick or treat because their parents feared psychos who poisoned the candy or slipped razor blades into the Tootsie Rolls or whatever. Yeah, as far as I can determine, it's a myth and never happens. If it did, think about how easy it would be to trace and capture said person.
I believe there has only ever been one confirmed case of poisoned candy, and it was a relative of the child who tainted the candy, and specifically just for that kid.
Photosensitive epilepsy. Only 3% of all epileptics are triggered by flashing lights, but it's what most people think of when you mention seizures.
To add to that, not all seizures are the kind where you fall down and flop around. My brother has severe epilepsy, and most of his seizures are just like he's really spaced out.
Having green eyes.
It warps your perspective when you live in areas with a lot of people who look similar to you. Only 2% of humanity is blonde, but my country has like half of that share, so it's completely normal.
Wasabi.
Why?
Because real wasabi is actually rare due to the plant being difficult to grow. Most wasabi you get is actually a horseradish base.
Being bitten by any venomous creature in Australia.
Everyone who comes to Australia is scared of the animals but forgets the real final boss, the sun.
Turquoise. I'm beginning study to be a jewelsmith, and apparently most of the turquoise on the planet has already been mined and used. What we use today is a stone called howlite that can visually imitate it. If it's real, it's likely hand-mined from the few small mines remaining that have some left. Real turquoise is very expensive as a result. Edit, I goofed, real turquoise is harder than its imitation.
That explains why the last time I picked up some it seemed awfully expensive. It was all over the place when I was a kid. I never used it much, so I didn't pay attention. I was always a big fan of opals. With the big finds in Africa a few years back that got cheap. Average red garnets surprised me with getting expensive last time I looked at them though. They were also dirt cheap when I started fooling around with metalwork, but that was probably close to 45 years back.
Penicillin allergies occur in less than 1% of the population, but over 10% of people report having the allergy. Link.
Blimps. IIRC, there's only 13 in the whole world and only 11 are functional. Edit. Correction, there are approximately 25 and about 13 are used.
That just blew my mind. I googled it and there are about 25 in the world and half are actually used. I live in an area where I drive by a docked one every so often and usually just think, oh cool, there's a blimp. I've never thought, I'm seeing 4% of all blimps in the universe right now.
Being aware. Waking up under general anesthesia. Most stories of this are MAC anesthetics where the patient is kept light and generally doesn't remember, but it isn't truly general anesthetic. If people really wake up under general anesthesia, they will have their eyes taped shut and a breathing tube in. They will also likely be paralyzed. It does happen, but it is extremely rare.
Would also add to this, that friend who really did wake up probably remembers the early part of waking up. Depending on the surgery and anesthetic, this may include still having a tube in, probably an LMA, and the people holding them down were actually trying to stop them from pulling out tubes, drips. Tourette Syndrome. Well, Tourette is not that uncommon, but the swearing is the most extreme form and it's very uncommon.
I've only met one person I know for sure was diagnosed with it. It was in middle school and also somewhat conveniently around the time Tourette's guy was popular on YouTube, so that's the only reason I was aware Tourette's was a thing. However, she just squeaked every few minutes, and after sitting behind her for a week or two I didn't even notice anymore. Thankfully she didn't get teased at all for it, and honestly my ADHD restless legs were probably a bigger distraction for anyone seated near us.
After all those years of stop, drop and roll, I've not been on fire once.
I have, and it works. There was a lot more swearing than those drills would have led you to believe.
Child abductions by strangers. Growing up in the 80s we were taught that if you were by yourself you were liable to be snatched up by a stranger. The reality is most abductions are by people the child knows. Stranger abductions make the news and often end tragically, but they're relatively rare.
That is why you should never talk to your family, only strangers.
Getting attacked by a shark.
Yeah, I'd be more scared of dolphins after all I hear lately.
Receiving CPR and surviving with good quality of life.
One of my good friends had sudden cardiac arrest due to VFib. Was completely healthy and normal and suddenly dropped dead. CPR saved her life and she is back to normal, albeit with a defibrillator now implanted in her chest. I think this is the best case scenario.
Multi-million-dollar personal inconvenience lawsuits. You're not suing MCD for millions because your fries were cold.
And, many times, these lawsuits that are personal inconvenience are actually intense lawsuits disguised as inconvenience by the company. One example of this is the woman who sued McDonald's for her coffee being too hot, which seems like an inconvenience, until you realize the coffee was so hot it burned her down to the bone.
Yay, that hot coffee case was so misunderstood. The lady had some pretty terrible injuries and even offered to settle for medical bills only. But she was vilified as a poster child for frivolous lawsuits. She was awarded the much higher payout because there was real negligence on the part of MCD and resulted in changes to standard practice at all fast food places designed to protect consumers. But the damage was done and a lot of people walked away with incorrect belief that you can sue and win for minor issues in the US. You see ignorant people in videos who immediately go to the "I'll sue you" threat for the most minor issues.
Court cases going to trial. The vast majority of cases are settled out of court and are over before a trial date is even scheduled. Slipping on a banana peel. Childhood TV taught me that this is a common accident.
OCD.
I like this one. It bothers me endlessly when people say things like, "I'm so OCD," because they like their desk to look neat. Genuine OCD affects something like 1 to 2% of people and is a devastating disorder. There's a subtype about germ obsessions, which people often think of, maybe because of that show Monk, but it can take many forms people aren't aware of, which are incredibly distressing. Things like intense fear of harming someone, or offending God, which lead to repetitive and time-consuming rituals. People know they're being unreasonable on some level but can't stop themselves. It gets even more confusing that there's also OCPD, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, that differs in its presentation despite sharing a similar name.
Not entirely sure as to its actually rarity, but for me. And #X200B. Vanilla. And #X200B. It's the asterisk go-to word for common, plain, or boring, when it's a pretty rare ingredient that's difficult to grow and only comes from a few places on Earth.
It also comes from the only fruit-producing orchid, which I think is pretty cool too. Also, vanilla gets a bad representative for being boring, as you pointed out, but vanilla is such a wonderful flavor. I've never understood vanilla hate.
It seems having two loving parents that treated you right is rare when you speak to people.
I won the lottery on good parents. Loved and took care of each other for 60 years. They were both doing their best to be the opposite of their own parents. Their parents sucked.
Dissociative identity disorder. Multiple personalities. A lot of that poo on TikTok is fake and straight up offensive.
This. I work in mental health and people assume they have another personality and are aware of it. I'm like, nope, that is your mood shifting and you either wanting attention or not wanting to take responsibility.
Writing code that executes on first compile.
Not to brag, but I can get Hello World to print every single time, without checking GitHub.
Helium.
Yes, on Earth the amount in the atmosphere is minuscule. We have to extract it from natural gas which will run out, or we will stop drilling for fossil fuels. In the meantime we'll waste our reserves by putting helium in children's balloons.
Salmonella. Statistically, only about 1 in 20,000 eggs is contaminated with Salmonella. Edit to further reduce your risk. Try to reduce contact with the egg itself and the outside of the shell. The shell itself holds most of the bacteria. As a kid who grew up in the 80s, Quicksand.
Grew up in the 90s and same. But then I was hired at my current job and Quicksand was actually included in my hazard training. It turns out there is actually some quicksand at some of my job sites. All those hours of cartoons have prepared me for this.
Accidental pregnancies * when using contraceptives properly according to instructions.
I was on the pill for 12 plus years. Never got pregnant and I was kinda pooty about taking them at the right time or missing days. And I tested that poo hard.
Wasabi. You've been eating green horseradish.
Having a best friend. That one person you can trust with your life, who is always there for you no matter what. Still looking for mine frowning face.
Late-stage abortions.
This. Third trimester abortions are extremely rare, and are usually done for medical reasons.
Being able to buy a house in New Zealand. I see so many people wanting to immigrate here. Good luck with that.
Plane crashes. It has been statistically proven that the number of plane crashes pales in comparison to the number of car crashes. Yet, there's way more people who are afraid of flying than there are people who are afraid of driving. Ironically enough, with lots of the people who are afraid of flying having no problem with driving. Edit. * okay, so everyone replying to my comment seems to be bring up the whole, in control, feeling. Just a heads up. I actually wanted to include stuff like taxis, buses, Ubers and whatnot with driving, in which you have about as much control as on a plane, with these options also being way less feared than planes, despite the fact that being in control no longer applies.
Coming at the exact same time. See it in movies and on TV all the time.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.